Inside a real-world SAP implementation, SAP's $1.5 billion bet on AI, and shocking whistleblower claims about S4HANA. Those are just a few of the topics we'll cover here in episode 234 of Transformation Ground Control.
Welcome to Transformation Ground Control. Ground Control. The podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation. This podcast features technology agnostic and international discussions related to digital strategy, software selection, implementation, change management, business process optimization, and everything else you need to know to make your digital transformation project successful. Whether you're embarking on an ERP implementation, supply chain transformation, or any other business or digital transformation, this podcast is for you. Now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Ground control to Major Tom.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 234. My name is Eric Kimberling, here with Darian Chwialkowski. Darian, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's the podcast that covers everything related to digital transformation, the tech-agnostic view of strategy, people, process, and technology. And today's episode is going to focus on SAP implementation. So if you're going through an S4HANA upgrade or thinking about an S4HANA implementation, this is going to be a great episode for you. And if you're going through any ERP implementation for that matter, most of these lessons you're going to hear today are going to be relevant to you regardless of whether you're using S4HANA or not. But certainly if you're on an S4HANA team, you're not going to want to miss this episode. We're going to start off with some social media questions that we've received recently. We'll get into some newsworthy topics. We'll start off on those newsworthy topics talking about SAP's cloud growth and how it's increasing. Their cloud adoption continues to increase favorably. SAP's $1.5 billion bet on AI and HR in particular. And then later in the show, we will have one of our clients, the CIO of one of our clients, a company called Kiewit, which is a big construction company that is in the middle of an S4HANA implementation. It's a client of ours. We're helping them through that implementation. And Justin will be on to talk about some of the lessons that he's experiencing right now as we speak, sort of lessons from the front lines of a S4HANA implementation that's happening right now. And it's a big, complex project, so we'll have a lot of great lessons there. And then later in the show, after Justin is here, we'll talk about some whistleblower claims, some dark sides, some dirty little secrets of the world of S4HANA. We're going to get to that later in the segment as well, or later in the show. And the purpose of that segment within the show will be to just make sure you go in with eyes wide open as it relates to your S4HANA implementation. So all that being said, we've got a lot to cover here today. What social media questions have you received here recently on some of our social media channels, Darian?
Yeah, some good questions. This first one to start is about cloud, which is a very hot topic right now, I feel like, with SAP. But the question is, if cloud is great for the software provider, but costly for the customer, who's really in charge when it comes to software solutions?
Unfortunately, it's not really you, or it's not as much you as I would like to see. When I say you, I mean the implementing organization. The software provider obviously has complete control over the functionality, the timing of rolling out new functionality and whatnot. The exception being if you do have customizations or things that you're doing off on the side or as part of your implementation, that changes the dynamic a bit. But I think the key here is that organizations, need to have control of their projects and make sure that they understand what flexibility they do and don't have. What flexibility are you giving up by moving to a cloud provider? Do you have all your eggs in that one basket? Is there going to be maybe a diversification of your cloud providers that makes sense to you just to help you not be so locked into one specific vendor? So it is the vendor, unfortunately, that has more and more control. The center of gravity in these transformations and these big projects is moving more towards the vendors themselves, which is the wrong direction, in my opinion. I think it should be more the center of gravity for any transformation should be the client implementing the solution, not the other way around. So the way I look at it is if anything you can do as an organization to regain some of that control and move that center of gravity back towards your organization and away from the vendor, that's something that's going to be super helpful. And I know that's something we'll get into a bit with our interview later today. Having worked with that client that's going to be on the show later today, I know that that's something they've been particularly good at, is navigating, the functionality and the benefits of a big ERP product like SAP and S4HANA, but not giving up complete control and not getting too locked in to that one vendor. So that's something we'll dive into in a bit more detail later in the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of SAP and everything like that, this next question is also about SAP. And it says, why should a company replace a stable, heavy, customized, and expensive SAP system just because SAP is now pushing a new version like S4HANA?
It's a great question, and I don't have a good answer for you. And I think that's the key. You may have a really good reason why you want to, and if you do, then more power to you. But if you can't justify it, and if you can't answer that question as an organization, then that might be the answer you need, which is, do we really need to move away from our heavily customized ECC instance that we invested heavily in? We're still getting ROI out of it, hopefully. And assuming you are getting ROI out of it, there's nothing wrong with staying put on ECC. Now, SAP, you talk to anyone in the SAP ecosystem will completely disagree with me and tell you that I'm wrong. You need to upgrade now. They're going to cut off support. You're going to have technical debt. You're falling behind. Blah blah blah. A million reasons why you should spend even more money on technology that you may or may not need. So, having said that, you've got to look through the sales hype and the sales pitch and do what's right for you as an organization. So that'd be my advice. I know there's a lot of organizations out there we work with that are more manufacturing and utilities based companies, asset intensive types of companies, and in those asset intensive industries, there's a theory or a mindset that they often have that I think can apply to other non-asset intensive industries as well. And that's a theory of it's a mindset of what they call sweating the assets. And a utility provider or a manufacturer will put in a new machine, or a utility will put in a substation and some infrastructure to support power distribution or whatever it is. And what they do is they invest in it and they maintain it, and they obviously don't want anything to break, but they will sweat those assets. They will get as much value out of those assets as they possibly can until it fails and they have to do something to replace it. And I think there's some merit in that mindset of technology. And even though it's not cool and it's not bleeding edge and you could argue it's not as innovative as the rest of the tech industry, there's nothing wrong with sweating the assets of an investment you've already made if you're getting value out of it. And if you could better deploy that money somewhere else, either in more limited technical scope to make more incremental improvements to your infrastructure, or maybe you reinvest some of that money in other capital investments. You build a new factory, you go acquire another company. There's so much you could do with that money that you've got to look at, is it really worth us upgrading to S4HANA and those opportunity costs that we're spending the money on S4HANA now instead of using the money elsewhere? Is that really worth it? Or is there a more value focused or a cost optimized way to do it? And that's what a lot of our clients are coming to us for, is they're saying, hey, we're not necessarily looking at this as an either or, yes, no type answer. Either we do this big, massive digital transformation or we don't. There's shades of gray in the middle that you've got to figure out, what makes the most sense for you. Maybe it's a more incremental change. Maybe it's just replacing part of ECC, or maybe it's putting in third-party solutions that plug some of the gaps or deficiencies of ECC without having to rip it completely out. So that's the kind of digital strategy planning and that objectivity that needs to happen in any sort of transformation project.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And you made some great points there, and it kind of nicely flows into our first newsworthy article of the day here, which is after SAP, they just released their Q2 and half year 2025 earnings. And their headline was kind of clear. It was, cloud revenue is still climbing. So total cloud revenue for SAP grew 19% year over year, hitting $3.9 billion this quarter. And with S4HANA Cloud growing at 20%, SAP is continuing, obviously, we've talked about this a lot, to push hard on its cloud first strategy. Here's the deeper story within their earnings, though. While cloud is rising, total revenue only grew by 5%, which could be a signal that SAP's traditional software and services are flattening or even being cannibalized by the cloud shift. This isn't just a financial transition, but it's also a business model transformation that they are going under, it seems, right now. The CEO made it very clear AI, cloud, and talent management are SAP's North Stars going forward. The recent acquisition of Smart Recruiters, which we will get into later, announced just days before the earnings came out, fit right into this strategy. And so do investments in business AIs and updates to Rise with SAP. That said, the operating profit is down 6%, largely due to R&D and restructuring costs. In other words, SAP is spending now to hopefully win later. But how long will shareholders stay patient? For customers, the question is this: what is the impact of all of this on your ERP roadmap? Are forced cloud migrations, higher subscription costs, and platform shifts? They can create a lot more disruptions than benefit if you're not aligned strategically. So with SAP evolving fast, the real test will be the execution, especially as clients continue to push back on aggressive timelines and pricing models. So with all of this, Eric, just in general, where do you, or for SAP's cloud revenue, and with that growing, but the total revenue isn't growing so fast, what do you think that tells us about SAP?
Well, I think it's a transitionary type of dynamic where they're giving up some revenue with maintenance costs and some of the legacy revenue streams that they had developed with ECC and companies that are still paying maintenance on that. So a lot of what I think is happening is a lot of companies are migrating to third-party maintenance providers like Rimini Street, Spinnaker, et cetera. They're recognizing that, okay, if SAP is going to cut off support and maintenance, let's start looking now for a third-party sort of lifeline or a lifeboat that'll help them through until they can make the switch to S4HANA, assuming they're going to go S4HANA, which I think is a good thing. Actually, the companies are being smart like that. They're not letting, even though cloud growth is increasing and a lot of companies are making that transition to S4HANA, some for very good reasons, some for not so good reasons. Some are doing it simply because SAP's pressuring them to do that. And I would advise against that if that's your main driver. And some are kind of in between. And that's part of why we want to talk to our guest today, our client, because I know, just from having worked with them over the last couple of years in their S4HANA journey, part of it was driven by the end of life maintenance and support for ECC, but it was also driven by the fact they wanted to upgrade the technology stack they had. So that we'll get some good lessons from him here in a few minutes. But I think the key here is just to what we're seeing with SAP is that, yes, they're getting more cloud revenue, which is really important to them, because for every dollar of cloud revenue, that's worth a lot more to them than a dollar of the old model's revenue. Even if you set aside what the real profitability is, investors love that recurring revenue and they want that every dollar they can get of cloud revenue. That's what they want. And that's why they're pushing so hard, is because investors are rewarding it handsomely. The CEOs are all getting comped. And I'm not just talking SAP here. I'm talking about all the big software vendors. The CEOs are getting comped super heavily. And it's quite lucrative for them personally if they can lead their organizations to shift as much of the industry over to the cloud, because that's what the investors want. So it is what it is. Nothing that's not good or bad, but you have to look at that with a grain of salt, look through the lens of reality. Economic reality is that the vendors want it more than you probably do. So you just need to do it on your own timeline. And I think that's what they're seeing in their results, which is kind of mixed. You're seeing some people move to the cloud, but you're seeing some people throttle back their maintenance and they're going to stop paying now on ECC, maintenance on ECC, because if you think about why would you pay maintenance to SAP if they're going to stop enhancing and stop R&D investments in ECC and they're going to stop supporting it. So it kind of makes sense to me that their overall revenue isn't as nearly as flattering as the cloud growth is.
Yeah. And besides for the couple points you made there for SAP customers, what should the SAP customers be thinking about as SAP doubles down on cloud and AI?
Well, I think it's just a matter of just figuring out the tempo, the strategy, the tempo, the scope that makes the most sense for you. And that's one thing I want to get into with our guest here in a few minutes as well, is because, that's something they've been particularly good at. And I'm always fascinated by the clients that find a way to stick to their guns and stick to their own, beat. They what's the cliche about beat of your own drum? They march to the beat of their own drum. I'm terrible with cliches. I always find a way to butcher them. But they march to the beat of their own drum and they do what they want to do and what their priorities are, regardless of what SAP wants or what any big vendor wants. And so that's what we'll dive into with them too. And so that's a question, we want to come back to when we get to the guest on the show as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, to switch into our next newsworthy article, we kind of touched on it a little bit in this first one, but to deep dive in on it, it's SAP has acquired Smart Recruiters for $1.5 billion. And this is Smart Recruiters is a modern AI enhanced hiring solution, streamlining everything from sourcing to onboarding with automation, analytics, and intelligent workflows. By bringing this into SAP Success Factors ecosystem, SAP is aiming to supercharge its HR suite with next-gen recruiting capabilities. So why are they doing this now? Talent acquisition is one of the most competitive spaces in HR, and SAP has been under pressure to keep on pace with Workday, Oracle, and newer players that are offering more agile, user-friendly tools. So Smart Recruiters brings them not just the tech, but a strong customer base and innovation pipeline. This also reflects a broader trend. AI is no longer a nice to have in HR. It's becoming more of a core infrastructure, from skills-based hiring to candidate scoring. The recruiting function is rapidly being transformed by machine learning, natural language processing, and predictive analytics. But there's a catch. Integrating Smart Recruiters into the SAP stack with all of its legacy baggage won't be easy. And the $1.5 billion price tag really raises expectations. This can't just be a bolt-on feature. SAP will need to prove it isn't just another shiny object accusation. But the real strategic shift is in how they support HR leaders in a post-gen AI world. If this is successful, this could reshape how HR systems think about talent strategy in the age of AI, but it's only time and execution will tell on this. But Eric, overall, what does this accusation of smart recruiters tell us about where SAP is heading with AI and HR tech?
Well, HR tech, I think, has always been important to SAP. They acquired Success Factors, which is a human capital management system, years ago, and now with this acquisition, that's not a bigger one necessarily, but a very relevant one. So I think, I think that they're recognizing that HR technology is emerging as a super high growth area, but also something that's becoming more and more important, especially as there continues to be somewhat of a war on talent, as far as, or not a war on talent, but a war for talent to get talent and to get the right people, the right resources across industries, across geographies. That seems to be a recurring long-term problem that a lot of companies are having. So HR technology can be a good way to help attract and retain top talent. So, and it also fits SAP's strategy of providing end-to-end solutions and kind of trying to be that one-stop shop for companies as much as they can be, to provide a complete offering without having to go to third-party vendors. I do wonder, though, the one thing that fascinates me about SAP is how the tables have turned so much in their strategy. I mean, their product strategy. What I mean by that is, back in the day of R3 and ECC, SAP, for the most part, built stuff from the ground up. I mean, yeah, they made acquisitions, but they were pretty good at rolling it all into a single, pretty unified platform. But in more recent years, like over the last decade or so, they've shifted focus, it seems like, and instead of being a one size fits all ERP provider, they've become somewhat of a best of breed provider now, where they've got S/4HANA as their core flagship product on the ERP side, but they've got Ariba for procurement, they've got Success Factors for HCM, they've got Concur for time and expense reporting, and now they've got Smart Recruiters for another HR solution. So they seem to have this strategy that Oracle had maybe 2 decades ago, where Oracle was out there buying up, Siebel and JD Edwards and PeopleSoft and all these different, ERP-ish sorts of products, and they just sort of let these products operate independently, and they still do in many cases, like with NetSuite. They acquired NetSuite, and NetSuite is its own standalone solution, and then they've got Oracle Fusion, And, but now with Oracle Fusion on the upmarket enterprise side of things that competes with S4HANA, Oracle seems to be creating more of an integrated suite of products now that's one platform, whereas SAP now has become what Oracle was in terms of just acquiring all these different companies and trying to piece it all together. So I don't know that either strategy is better or worse or more effective. It's just a matter of which ones are going to be the best, the best fits for their clients.
For sure. And with the AI in recruiting, do you think that is actually delivering ROI, or is it mostly hype and still waiting to see what the ROI will be with AI?
I don't know. I mean, unfortunately, there's been a lot of negative blowback for AI, particularly in recruiting, because of biases that are still evident in AI models. I think it was, I want to say it was Workday. Don't quote me on this. Workday's attorneys, don't sue me if I'm wrong, but I think Workday got sued, and I believe they lost the lawsuit where their model, some sort of AI mechanism within Workday. If I have the vendor wrong, if it's not Workday, the point's still the same. There is a major HR tech provider out there that was sued recently for bias in the way AI was handling recruiting and screening candidates. It was basically accusations of discrimination, if I remember correctly. So, and if anyone has more information or remembers this better than I do, feel free to drop in the chat, drop a link to an article or whatever. I'll look it up as well after the fact. But I do believe it was Workday. So I think there's been a lot of negative press around AI in the HR tech space, largely because of that. I think eventually it will become very relevant and super high value ROI, because you think about the mass amounts of information and candidate profiles that a person has to review right now to screen and narrow it down to, qualified set of candidates. If you use AI to automate that, that's going to make things so much more effective and efficient than things are now. So I think that the potential is huge, but I think there's just some clear roadblocks or some speed bumps along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's some great points, but I'm excited to get into a conversation and kind of see the real use case with a customer and SAP today.
Yeah, we're going to bring on one of our larger clients. They're a $15 billion plus. I think they're around $16 billion in revenue. Construction company going through a big S4HANA implementation as we speak. And what I love about this case study and this use case is that they are not all in on just SAP. They've got other products they're rolling out as part of their project as well. They've got a unique mindset and focus on what the focus of the project is and what the priorities are. And coincidentally, it's also Take Your Kids to Work Day today. So we'll see if any kids make a cameo or anything on camera here when we interview our guest. He's the CIO of a large company called Kiewit. We're going to bring him on the show here in just a moment to talk about his SAP S4HANA journey that's in flight right now. We'll get the good, the bad, the ugly. And then later in the show, we'll talk about some whistleblower claims that we've seen in the industry amongst our client base as it relates to S4HANA. So be sure to stick around. We've got a lot more to cover. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I met her in a club down in Old Soho, where you drink champagne and it tastes like Coca-Cola.
I'm excited to announce the release of our 2025 Digital Transformation Report. It's available now on the Third Stage Consulting website, www.thirdstage-consulting.com. This report gives you an unbiased, technology-agnostic insight to help you optimize your organization's projects for success. Get your copy today using the QR code in front of me or on our website.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So, collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S/4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 234. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski, and you can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. Every week we provide tech-agnostic guidance and advice and guests and discussions that relate to digital transformation, including the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of transformation. So thanks for being here. And we've got an exciting guest, first-time guest, client of ours. He's a CIO of a major client of ours here in North America, a big construction company called Kiewit. The guest is Justin Rauner. He's with the company, and we've been working with him on the S/4HANA journey. And we wanted to have him on the show to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of his transformation project. So with that all being said, Justin, welcome to the show.
Great to talk to you again, Eric.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So before we jump in and dive into your current project and sort of the real life battle wounds and the good, the bad, the ugly of everything going on with your project right now, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do at Kiewit, if you don't mind.
Yeah, my name is Justin Rauner. I'm the Chief Technology Officer here at Kiewit. I've been here just about 12 years. Prior to that, I spent the better part of close to 15 years in retail, manufacturing, and CPG. For our ERP initiative, I'm the executive sponsor. Really my first foray into SAP, but I have a lot of big project experience with a lot of different software companies and partners. So happy to share our experiences and my experience as well.
Great. Well, it's a interesting journey you've been on for sure. But tell us a little bit about, just to get started, how did this all get started, this S/4HANA journey that you're on right now? Tell us a little bit about how you guys got to where you are and what led you down the S/4HANA upgrade path.
Sure. So we started looking at really what's next and when back in 2018. Kiewit had implemented ECC 6 prior to my arrival, and we just really didn't have a compelling business need at the time, but we want to avoid ever putting our company on the position of the proverbial green screen. So you always want to be looking for, what's next and how do you best support a growing enterprise like ours. At that time, we evaluated a handful of options and solutions, ultimately choosing to revisit the assessment and about every 2 to 3 years as appropriate. At that time, ECC 6 was fine. It met our needs currently and for the foreseeable future. Our business had kind of got over that initial hump of the implementation of it, how to use it, the good, bad, and the ugly, and had somewhat optimized their processes around it. And there really wasn't anything in the marketplace that we felt would be a dramatic improvement. I would say probably during the middle of the pandemic, we started to zero in on about a 2025-ish target to implement and start a new ERP upgrade. 2022, 2023, we did a deeper dive evaluation on the marketplace. We looked at your traditional monolithic ERPs, and we looked at best of breed solutions. I would tell you that we took a really eyes wide open approach, but at the end of the day, we felt like SAP was the best choice for a variety of reasons. Ultimately, there's no perfect solution. They all have their pros and cons, and you have to weigh, an entire tech stack, your degree of customization that you have today, software providers, investment strategies, short and long term. And also certainly worth noting is once you get to looking for ERP and back office solutions that can support a business with, 10 billion plus in revenue, the list gets very, very short in a hurry. So, for a variety of reasons, we really felt like SAP was the right solution for us going forward, not because it was incumbent, but because it best met our needs going forward.
Right. Did it help that you had that investment over the years in the legacy SAP tech stack? In other words, did that learning curve, did it help with the learning curve and just having some, even though it's a new product with S/4HANA, it's a different product than ECC. It's still SAP. It's got a similar look and feel in some ways. Did that help you guys?
Absolutely. As we've gone through or in the middle of, as you mentioned, our implementation, there's a lot of familiarity with a tremendous amount of the SAP functionality. Now, the finance module, as an example, tremendous amount of change, but given our staff and our familiarity with it, that certainly has helped us. But again, it was not the primary driver of why we selected it, but it's certainly been an unintended benefit.
Yeah. We always tell clients like yourselves, if, whatever your incumbent is, especially if it's one of the bigger ones like SAP or even Oracle, Microsoft, if you've got these investments in the technology, you've got to consider that, because sometimes that does provide some additional learning curve benefits, and it allows you to leverage some of the investments you've made over the years, even though you're upgrading to a newer product. But sometimes that can help.
There certainly were a number of conversations we had from less about the business familiarity and more about the tech stack. When you talk about the size of team required to support our current ECC environment, it would have been a very big lift to move to something like Oracle, as an example. But it would not, if we had thought that would have been a better answer, we would have went that route. But it was certainly a conversation.
Yeah. Good stuff. Well, I'd love to hear from the audience, just as we're getting into the conversation here, what you think the most important success factors are for an SAP or any general ERP implementation. We'd love to hear your feedback on that, or your thoughts on that. And we'll certainly ask you that question here in a few minutes, Justin. But before we get to just some of the lessons, just as we set the context here for the project, I know that, in our discussions with you and in doing work with you in the Kiewit team in the past, you emphasized that this project isn't a digital transformation, and you focus more on a do no harm approach to your upgrade strategy. Can you talk a little bit about that and what you meant by that when you and I first started talking about that?
Yeah, because it catches a lot of people off guard when you mentioned something like that. So ultimately, we're doing this upgrade because we think it's the right thing to do for the health of our business long term and our growth goals. It's not based on a hard ROI calculation or capability enablement. We didn't get a business driver to justify this investment. I talked about, we started looking at this in 2018. I would have preferred if there had been some tremendous business gap and capability we could have enabled with a new ERP implementation. That didn't happen. That didn't materialize. But we do believe this is the right thing to do for our business. You and I have talked offline. The Kiewit business is actually humming along. So much of what you hear in the marketplace and continue to get pushed on is wholesale business transformation. That may be right for a lot of companies. It's not right for us. And so we're trying to mostly do this as a technical upgrade, almost like when I think about talking to our business customers, like preventative maintenance on a piece of heavy equipment. It's just the care and feeding required to make sure that we are best positioned. And again, never putting our company behind the 8 ball. We could have kicked the can down the road. We could have pushed this off, but there will become a point in time where you can't push it any further. And as I'm sure we'll talk here a little bit, SAP pushing customers in the end of support deadlines and things like that for a variety of reasons, now is the right time. When I think about do no harm, the term you used and we have used here extensively internally, it is at a micro level as it relates specifically to our downstream data. So our non-SAP systems and really the gymnastics we're currently going through to avoid business disruption. Again, we're humming along. We want to continue humming along. We want to get this thing implemented and allow our business to continue to do and engineer and build great things going forward, not be disrupted by back office total transformation. That's just not the goal. So, if I put a bow on it, we're not following the standard playbook or someone else's playbook. We feel like we've developed the right playbook for Kiewit at this point in time for our company. That's what do no harm and, a technical upgrade. A lot of people would prefer to wave a flag and talk about total business transformation, and that's right for them. It is just not what we're trying to do.
Yeah, and we were talking right before we went live here today, and you made a comment that what's right for you guys may not be right for another organization and vice versa. And I think that's a really important point, of self-awareness and an important thing to point out, because a lot of times organizations think that I have to do a digital transformation because that's the buzzword. And we always hear about, myself included, I espouse a lot about how if you're not going to have an ROI, maybe you shouldn't do the project. But in your case, you're saying, hey, we're not doing this for those necessarily for those tangible hard dollars. We're doing it for other reasons. Here are the reasons why. And I think making sure that you're all on the same page with that, that's the important thing. It's not so much, is that the right answer or not? It's, are you all on the same page? And if you are, and you're managing the project accordingly, then that's really the key right there. And I think that gets overlooked a lot.
And it's something that we've had to orient all of our partners, including SAP, about, because they want to come in and talk about business transformation. And that's the popular buzzword. And again, for lots of companies, they need to transform their business. Kiewit's been around. I'm looking at a giant sign outside my window here since 1884. And we have been fortunate through great results and excellence of not needing to dramatically reinvent who we are. We exist and operate in many different verticals, and that works to our competitive advantage. But ultimately, the core of what our business has not changed since Peter Kiewit started this company. Doesn't mean that we aren't evolving. It doesn't mean that we are stuck in our ways. It just means the model as defined is operating at a very, very high level. And we want to continue to sustain it and build a foundation that it could continue to expand over the years ahead. It's a pretty simple formula of not needing to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah. Very, very well said. I want to turn to the audience real quickly here today. Sanjay on LinkedIn says, good morning. Hello. Thanks for joining today, Sanjay. Sam Graham joining from Spain on LinkedIn. Thank you for being here. Pritam joining on LinkedIn. Thank you for joining. And Satish has an interesting comment to follow up your point, Justin. Satish says, do the tech upgrade and preventive maintenance. Very good analogy and approach. No real value comes from trying to do a business transformation /value/design thinking, et cetera, as it is putting the cart before the horse. So I think what Satish might be saying is that having the technology there enables you to do the business transformation or add value or
right.
Get that ROI you're looking for, but you have to get the technology in place in order to be able to do that, which is interesting. Good point. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, situationally, yes. For Kiewit right now, that's absolutely right. We're putting this foundation in place, and it'll allow us to tweak and adjust and adapt as we go forward. For other companies, they might be, again, backed in the corner, having to reinvent themselves, having to totally redefine their supply chain or their customer base or their product mix, whatever it might be in a different industry. In those cases, you really need to consider to document your as is, your desire to be in a more traditional way, if you will. But for what we're trying to do, least disruption to the business is our recipe for success.
And speaking of disruption to the business, you mentioned before we went live as well that today is take your kids to work day.
That's
and
right.
So if anyone hears just the ever so slight faint sound of kids in the background, that's why. It's because you guys are having take your kids to work day.
We're having to get creative from our labor force, but we have not yet dipped into the ranks of elementary and high school students.
Well, I was just going to say, are you at least putting them to work? Are they able to help on the project while they're there?
I'll have to go out in the hallway and see what's going on after we wrap up. But it's a great thing. I mean, obviously, a lot of people tuning in today don't know much about Kiewit. Great family values. We do the right thing, getting our kids involved. And from a legacy perspective, you could see 2-3 generations. It's not unusual to walk through the hallway and see 2 or 3 generations of family members working in different capacities in different parts of this organization. So I'm all for people being able to bring their kids to work today on a nice summer day. So it's all good.
Yeah. Get them out of the house before going back to school here shortly.
That's right.
Good stuff. Well, hi from Pakistan is what Muhammad says on LinkedIn. Hello, Muhammad. And then kind of a follow-up. I assume this is a follow-up to your green screen comment, Justin. This is from Aditya. Text green game over. So I assume that it's referred.
I'm just old enough to talk about that. When I started out my career as a developer many years ago at Hallmark, I was a COBOL developer. So I still know the green screens and remember them fondly or not so much at times. But that kind of background and experience is ultimately culminated in being in a position to drive an initiative like this. So I do feel like, but I think most people here that understand the correlation of that green screen, it's not where companies want to be or need to be moving forward for sure.
What's crazy is how much of the workforce right now doesn't even know what in the world you're talking about when you say green screen.
So
what the hell does that mean?
maybe a brief detour. So my secret now, or maybe now won't be so secret plan, is in retirement to just be able to go support some of these businesses that cannot move off the mainframe, that cannot get off the green screens and charge some exorbitant per hourly rate to fix some of their solutions. So if you see me hanging out on the beach with a laptop in 10 years or so working on COBOL, I'm just taking care of my retirement. So It's hard. I mean, a lot of those industries are going to have a hell of a time getting off that stuff. It's unbelievable, but there's something to said about the reliability and the performance and how rock solid it is. I'm happy to not be in that environment, but I have many peers that are working for companies that are trying desperately to figure out how do we get off of it and know, kind of the mountain that's ahead of them, given the retiring workforce that understands it.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and those RPG programmers are really hard to find. Some of the RPG and other mainframe focused people. So it's not a terrible idea. And a lot of companies are still using these really old systems, trying to move off of them.
That's right.
Hello to Aditya on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining today. See, Jason on LinkedIn says, Justin speaking reality and pragmatism. That's exactly why we wanted him on the show here today. So thanks for that comment there. John on LinkedIn says, great topic. Tuned in from Kenya. Is that what you mean? I'm not sure what Kenya is, but I assume you mean Kenya. Sanjay says, can I ask a question? Yes, please do. That's what we're here for. Any questions you have, feel free to add them here. Mohammed on LinkedIn says hello from Digitized Solutions in Minnesota. And then we have at least one person here, Satish on LinkedIn, that can relate to the mainframe discussion. Mainframes, we had to submit claim expenses and a bunch of stuff till even 2000. It was right around Y2K when a lot of the mainframes seemed to go away as people prepared for the Y2K cutover.
Yeah.
Nicholas on LinkedIn calls it the good old days. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I don't know if that's a good old days.
Much simpler days.
Yeah, simpler. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Mohammed's from a small Oracle consulting firm. And then Darian on LinkedIn says, are there scenarios where more disruption might actually be necessary or even beneficial? Have you guys come across that at all in your discussions and in your transformation itself?
Yeah, some of this gets in our governance model, what we're going to take on. We also have a commitment that we've made to our executive sponsorship team about being what we've called opportunistic. So when we get into certain areas or functionality where it's an acceptable amount of risk, or we think the payoff is worth it at this time, we are entertaining some of those enhancements. There are some things we're doing in our finance space around billings, as an example, or our ledgers. We took a purist approach of drawing the line of pure technical upgrade, but with our executive sponsors' help in filtering out where's some real bang for the buck opportunities, we are taking some of those things on right now. There are other things like warehouse management is probably a good example. We're implementing the basic, I don't remember what the module is called, the warehouse management module they're implementing from SAP, but there's a standard and there's an advanced. We're going standard out of the box, but ultimately we will be able to extend that into advanced in the future, but not right now. So yes, there are opportunities for disruption, but again, it's a really fine line on how long you want these projects to go on, how many people, because if you really open up Pandora's box and said, what would you like us to do? The list would be endless. So we're trying to, time box it, contain it, produce a predictable outcome, get it across the finish line. Because the other thing you really have to, if you've been at this long enough to know, once you get these large systems in place, the carryover list of enhancements is sitting there staring you in the face. I would much prefer that the users use it as is for maybe it's 60 days or 90 days, because the list they will then come back to you with will change a lot. Oh, we know we asked for those 100 things, but really now that we've been in it for a while, for 3 months or whatever that appropriate time period is for you, you identify different use cases, higher opportunity for value. So that's how I think about it. We're not going to get too distracted with what people believe based on what they know today. Let's get it in, get them using the system, and then we'll adjust and make the enhancement list from that point, as opposed to sitting here right now.
So how do you navigate the hype, not the hype, I don't know if that's the right word, but the sales incentives or the vendors kind of pushing, like SAP pushing you to use all these cool bells and whistles that you're not using. And I imagine that drives them crazy. Like, hey, you've got all these advanced functions that you're not even considering right now. You should really be thinking about that. Is that a pressure point for you guys, or how would you navigate it if it was?
Partners like SAP, Microsoft, and others that have worked for us long enough to know that they should provide awareness of what's out there and not push. We're aware of what's out there and what we believe the capabilities are and what the value proposition is for Kiewit. But ultimately, it's about crawl, walk, run. You got to get your, the foundation right before you can start to layer some of these additional things on. Certainly, in the case of SAP, they would love for us to be the flagship customer for Joule Talk, and Copilot, and all these other things. That's great. But there's so much low-hanging fruit about how I can materially drive value to the Kiewit business on the fundamentals, and then we will stair-step our way into those pragmatically. Because the other thing you really got to watch out for is maybe more so the really cheap entry point widgets and features and get people excited about it, and then you get the bill 3 years later when they realize the marketable value of some of those things. So just kind of always on the lookout for what will add value to Kiewit, but ultimately being very thoughtful and intentional about how we walk into it, because every year they've got something new to sell and something to upsell. And part of why we picked Rise, and I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit, is a bet on the future. We do think that SAP will ultimately get this right, that they'll build some great capabilities. But I would tell you that we always want to be in tune with what they're building and why, where we think the value proposition is. But very rarely do we need to be the beta testers for that stuff, or to get too excited about it and it doesn't really have a return on investment. So try to be pragmatic about where we get into. But and thankfully, we've got some people in the business that get super excited about what they read on a press release or others, but they're also very logical and analytical. And we go back and talk about the reality versus the hype. And the word you use there is right. It's hype. I'm a big fan of the Gartner hype cycle, and just, I'm sure most people know what that is. And I want to see something established and stabilized before I get too excited about it. AI is another great thing. Everyone's pushing for AI. I think ultimately it's going to be a huge disruptor, but we as a company are trying to be very intentional and thoughtful about where could we get some real return on an investment there? Because you can have a ton of investment without a tremendous amount of return. But we work with our partners such as SAP, Microsoft, and others, pushing forward what Kiewit is going to do from an AI strategy, but not getting too far out over our skis and just throwing money away to chase a shiny object. We're trying to be very intentional, because ultimately we do think there'll be a big return, but being very strategic and intentional about where and why we invest.
Yeah, and coming out of the Sapphire conference season here, with all the announcements around Joule and some of the agentic stuff they're doing, it's really cool stuff, but also being able to be clear-headed about it and not getting too excited. The crawl, walk, run, I think is a great analogy, or a great way to put it, because the Joule stuff, all the AI enhancements they're making, a lot of the stuff SAP is doing is light years ahead of where most companies are. And that's okay. That's their job. And eventually companies will catch up to them. But in the meantime,
that's right.
Basics in place.
That's right.
Good way to put it. So John, it turns out, is joining from Kenya on LinkedIn. So we got that part yet. And then Nicholas was clarifying when he said good old days, he was referring to RPG. So that was a good point of clarification there. And then Anthony on LinkedIn has an interesting question. I'm going to change the question a little bit, if you don't mind, Anthony. I'm going to actually broaden this a little bit. But Anthony says, hi, tuning in from London. Great podcast. How many different suppliers were contracted with as part of the implementation? And maybe I'll just sort of elaborate on that question a little bit and just say, can you talk a little bit about how you chose your implementation partners and just what some of the lessons learned were there along the way?
Yeah, good question. Well, in terms of total partners, I'm going to say around a half dozen, and that gets a little squishy in terms of what's exactly in the ERP upgrade versus what we call parallel initiatives, but let's say 6 to 10, depending on the context. But as it relates to the core systems integrator for S4, I think we took the time to really understand our project requirements and what we needed from our partners. I've worked with several tier one partners and boutique firms throughout my career. They've all got their advantages and disadvantages. So trying to find that right mix. Ours, again, is mostly what you'd largely hear as a brownfield or a brownfield plus, a technical migration, not a business transformation. If we've been talking about wholesale business transformation, I would have been more inclined to go the tier one route. But the one thing I absolutely believe around tier one SIs is that if you don't manage them, they will manage you. If you don't have the people that have successfully worked with those kind of providers or partners in the past, you better hire some really good people that have successfully worked with them. When you think about that day one, whether it's, and they all do it, whether it's Accenture, Deloitte, PwC, when they land those first 100 or 200 people, you've lost control that you can never get back. The tier one SIs are not bad per se, but again, you have to effectively manage them. I've heard you reference getting Accenture in the past, and that's a term that, immediately clicks. I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that we prioritize talent over the badge that they're wearing. So again, the Big Four example of the first 80 to 100 people that land on your project, there's usually 2 or 3 stars, and there's a lot of paying for junior staff on the job training. So what we were thinking about was trying to find a way to go get those 2 or 3 stars that had that kind of experience, that ideally would be able to hire from their own peer network. Because at the top, the best people, they all know the other really good people because they've come across them in the last 20 or 30 years of their own careers. And so that was a lot of our strategical approach of why we went to a boutique, if you will, SI partner. There were risks if you think about it from in a startup perspective and the firm we went with, but ultimately I would tell you on the backside with the boutique firm and the one we picked in particular, I feel like Kiewit owns this initiative. It's not the partner owns this initiative. And I feel like we have true partners aligned to a common goal, which is our success. They aren't driven by billable hour rates or total revenue by the customer, regardless of how the project goes. Our success is their success. They need us as a referenceable customer moving forward, and we are heavily incentivized to ensure that we all get to the right thing. So I know you've talked about this throughout your career, but what doesn't sit with me very well is when you hear a company talk about, well, the SI led us down this path. That just doesn't fly with me. When I think about this tier one versus boutique conversation, a lot of CIOs will pick a tier one for a large ERP project because it's effectively, the de facto standard. When you pick an Accenture, no matter why that decision was made, it's almost viewed as defendable if a project goes sideways. And if they couldn't do it, well, who do we think we could be any better than what they were doing? That's a built-in excuse. If it goes sideways with a boutique firm, well, people such as myself get skewered over, well, how could you pick somebody unproven and smaller? But ultimately, I felt like, and we as a leadership team felt like the collective upside and the risk was lower. I mean, it was the right pick, again, for us situationally. It doesn't mean it's right in all cases, but it's definitely played out to our advantage. We got over some early startup bumps, and as this thing has really gotten rolling and the teams have gelled and merged and fully staffed, and we did get the A talent we were looking for, it's been wildly successful for us. I couldn't say enough good things about the partner we picked and ultimately sticking with them and finding our rhythm and delivering it. It wasn't without pain and startup, but now we're humming along and much better for it.
I'm here with Justin from Kiewit. We're talking about his experience in his current in-flight S4HANA implementation. We've got a lot more to cover, but first we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Transformation Ground Control.
I don't mind letting you down easy, but just give it time.
My name is Eric Kimberling, and I'm the CEO and founder of Third Stage Consulting. Before we dive too far into today's content, I want to invite you to learn a little bit more about Third Stage Consulting, who we are and what we do. I've included a link to a video right here that describes Third Stage in a bit more detail. It talks about our story, our history, our philosophy, our clients, our service offerings, and that sort of thing. But in general, what Third Stage Consulting does is we're an independent and tech-agnostic consulting provider. We help clients through their entire digital transformation life cycles, beginning with digital strategy, software evaluation and selection, all the way through and including implementation planning, implementation readiness, and the actual implementation itself. We're technology agnostic, so we only represent our clients' best interests. We do not represent software vendors. But having said that, we work very closely with software vendors, all the leading players that you can imagine we've worked with, both in helping clients evaluate and select them, but also in helping clients implement those solutions as well. So we have a very broad, objective, agnostic view of the market that is meant to really represent your interest as you go through your digital transformation. I also encourage you to scan this QR code right here to get access to our resource center. This resource center has a ton of information, ton of ebooks that are free. You have access to top 10 software rankings, playbooks for how to make your project more successful, guides to change management, YouTube videos, all kinds of stuff that are going to help you through your digital transformation. So I encourage you to scan this QR code to get access to those resources. And please feel free to reach out to me directly to brainstorm ideas about your project. Even if it's just informally, you want to bounce around some ideas and get some informal advice, I'd be happy to spend some time with you. So feel free to reach out to me. I've included my contact information below. You can also find it in the description field of this video as well.
The last thing you want to have happen is for your digital transformation to end up in court. I've been doing this for 20 years and I have seen everything. My name is Marcus Harris. I'm a software and technology attorney focusing my practice on drafting and negotiating software-related contracts and litigating software disputes across the country. Feel free to reach out to us at taftlaw.com. We'd love to talk to you about the litigation process and what you can expect.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 234. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian and Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday by going to transformationgroundcontrol.com. The show is produced by Major Town Productions and sponsored by Third Stage Consulting, which is an independent tech-agnostic consulting firm that helps clients with their digital transformation journeys. And we're here with Justin, our client, Kiewit, talking about his S4HANA implementation. I don't want to be dismissive of the quality of the SI you chose, because it sounds like for sure the right partner. But I think the bigger advantage you guys have is what you said about ownership. You guys, whether it was this smaller boutique type of firm or whether it was a tier one SI, you guys clearly are in control. You know, you have ownership of the project. So regardless, I think that's the key right there. And yet you want to find the right partner to help you. But the key is to what you said is you manage them. They're not managing you, and you're not letting the project get out of hand.
I think there were some leaders on our initiative that early on were looking for more from that SI, if you will, of, you know, some of them came from companies like ConAgra and others that had experience working with big partners. And so those big firms bring the playbooks and they bring the experience, and they're driving everything, right? And this group didn't do that. We had to collaboratively work together to find those playbooks and run books and how we're going to operate. And ultimately, it made us better for going through that process. Again, back to the point, hey, we got to own this, because good, bad, or indifferent, we're the ones that the executive team is going to look towards. And that partner ultimately goes away at the end, and it's ours. So I feel really good about where we're at. I had some intuition as to why to go that route. Some of those assumptions were true, and other factors have come along through the ride, but it was the right pick, but maybe for not all the reasons I thought initially.
Right. Yeah. Nicholas on LinkedIn agrees with you in your approach. He says small consulting firms tend to own the client's pain for sure, in my experience. So great feedback there. Nicholas also said he agrees with you 100%. And then Aditya says great insights. And here's a question from, actually, let me get to this question first, from Ginger on LinkedIn. Ginger says, what is your approach to engage business super users in a way that builds business true ownership and adoption that will survive and thrive post go live? And it sort of fits into this whole ownership theme, but now working our way down to, so far we've talked a lot about project governance, ownership of the project overall, but as we work our way down to the frontline employees, you know, what has been your approach to get the masses engaged and involved and feeling like they own this project as well?
Yeah. Again, I'll keep using that word situational. So if we were greenfield, if we were starting from scratch, if we were going with Oracle or some other kind of thing that we didn't have a lot of familiarity with, what we would have done would have been co-location. We would have everybody working together, business and IT sitting side by side. In this case, more of a brownfield approach. We I think we'll talk a little bit more about this, but we ended up standing up a sandbox early on. We got some business involvement right out of the gate with the system and really data that they were familiar with. But one of the things that we prioritized very early on, given that we weren't co-located, and we're pretty close in proximity, most of the core users of this back office system are in the same metro area. They're not in the same building. We wanted to ensure that there was appropriate buy-in. So we really prioritized organizational change management and communication to an extreme extent. Our advantage in this was, and I did not talk about this earlier, in 2023, we made $1 billion acquisition, and Kiewit's done acquisitions over more than 100 years, but of that size, scale, and magnitude was different for us. And so we spent the majority of 2023 acquiring that business, integrating them into our systems as opposed to just carrying on what they had. And so we started to build this big SAP muscle, if you will, for the first time since ECC was put in. Through that project, we started our governance model and strategy. So we started to build that muscle. Organizational change management and communications. We over communicated because in that case, it was, 1,000 or more employees new to Kiewit, spread all throughout North America. And so we built the communication, organizational change management muscle. That allowed us to seamlessly transition to this ERP upgrade. It's almost like you might have thought of Kiewit Technology Group as a bunch of 400-meter sprinters for the better part of a decade. All of a sudden, we had to train for and execute a marathon. We did that in 2023, and that also went into the timing of why now for the ERP upgrade. We'd finally learned how to run a marathon, and now we were getting ready to go run the biggest marathon, the Boston Marathon. It was just a logical continuation. But the business buy-in, we learned how to do that through the Weeks acquisition in this calendar year 2023, and we've been able to continue it. It's not rocket science, but it certainly requires expertise at the top, good leadership, constant communication. We do have regular touch points. We have almost every 2 weeks. We have pulse checks. We're doing constant surveys, getting feedback. We're making constant adjustments about, do you know what's coming or not? I will tell you, for the first half of 2024, there was a little bit more of the technology group behind the curtain trying to figure out what we're doing and why, getting oriented and getting things set up. And then once we kind of pulled back the curtain and first exposed our business users to, hey, here's what's coming, then it's been, okay, we're all on board. And ultimately, as we found out, in many of the cases with the S4 system compared to ECC, there's not a tremendous amount of change. Once the business users saw their system, what their new system would be with the data they were familiar with, you got, oh, I know how to do this. We're good. Any of the fear and uncertainty and, oh my God, what's it going to do to us, has largely tamped down. And in those areas where there's dramatic change, finance module or equipment, a module we ran in the past is no longer available from SAP, so we're having to implement something different. We're going above and beyond just to ensure buy-in and engagement. I don't know there's a secret formula around business understanding and education, other than you just have to be intentional. You got to have a great team around organization and change management and communications and just execute on that. It's easy for that to slide to the background, but we prioritized it right up front. I think it was one of the things, Eric, that probably surprised maybe you a little bit in your and I first conversation, your team when they first landed, because most of the time OCM is overlooked or not prioritized enough. And I would tell you, if anything, we've overdone it because we do understand the value of it.
Yeah. Yeah. In which case, are you really overdoing it or over communicating it? It's probably may feel like it to you, but to the front lines, that's probably what they need.
And I'd rather err on the side of over communication than under. We just, nobody wants surprises, but especially not with your core customer base.
I'm still waiting to meet that CIO or team leader or executive sponsor that comes out of this. Maybe you'll be the first, but someone that comes out of this and says, you know what, we invested way too much time and money in change management. we should have throttled that back and done something different, but I have yet to meet that person.
I don't think so, but I think, and when we do surveys of our executive leaders and others that, are engaged, are aware, but not necessarily engaged on a daily or monthly basis, they've all been very complimentary, and nobody's surprised at what's going on, where we're at, where we're going. So I feel really good about that.
Yeah. Now, shifting gears somewhat abruptly from the human people change management side of things back to a technical topic here. This is from Dan on LinkedIn. Dan says, because it was a technical migration, did you clean the data from ECC first before loading into S4? If you didn't clean, then do you think it will affect your AI when you turn on some Joule functionality in the future?
Boy, there's the grenade dropped in the middle of it. So the hardest thing about our entire initiative has not been the core migration of ECC to S4. It has been about the data. We have not been fortunate enough or smart enough to invest on a really good underlying data strategy. So I'm going to take a little bit of a detour here and try to answer that question as we go. We are cleansing the data, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we have the optimal data strategy that we're executing against. Kiewit had allowed and essentially promoted a mindset around downstream data where the source system matched what was replicated to operational data stores or data warehouses, almost in a like-for-like perspective. For those of you with technical backgrounds, it's the virtual equivalent of hard coding. In a lot of cases, we didn't have a layer of abstraction sitting above it. So what that means is, as we've created, at the time we started this initiative, we had 6 different downstream data platforms. We have shrunk it to 3, but we have not necessarily solved the foundational challenge, the atomic level of data. We are cleansing the data in ECC. We will get it to S4. But as I push data to the downstream systems, we talked a little bit earlier about do no harm. Most of that was around our data platforms. We are having to manipulate S4 data to look like ECC data to allow everything downstream to continue to function as it does today. That was an intentional choice for a period of time. Once we get the ERP implemented, we will be able to come back and appropriately define a data strategy, a technical strategy to enable the data strategy, and I will be able to quote really clean data for the long term. Do I think it will materially impact what we could get out of AI? I can make it better over the long term. I believe within the SAP ecosystem, we'll be fine. You talk about Joule and some of its fine. But when I think about some of the other things we're doing beyond the SAP ecosystem, in our case, our primary platform will be Snowflake, but we have some others. We are also leveraging Palantir. There are a number of things downstream that I'll be able to materially make better. But we had to make a choice. A lot of companies will make a decision that says, okay, I was on ECC. I'm going to have a defined point in time where that data is good up until that point, and then I'll have an after view of the new data model. We had a requirement to effectively be able to tie the old data to the new seamlessly in applications and analytic capabilities that exist downstream, which is forcing us to go down this path of mapping, again, new data structures on the SAP world into old data structures just because our data environment is not optimal. I hope I answered that question. We are doing conversions, we are cleansing, but ultimately there's a bigger thing for us, and that's the downstream data. Kiewit did not use business objects or BW, which was common for a lot of companies, run data through BW and push it to a data warehouse. They made a choice early on, and it's easy to be Monday morning quarterback, but at that point in time, they thought it was the right decision to replicate data in a like-for-like capability. That allowed them to move it fast, but it did not create the data structures you would want to logically and physically model to create extended capabilities over time. We will come back and fix it, just not as part of this ERP project.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, you mentioned Palantir and Snowflake as 2 examples of non-SAP products that you're using. How did you navigate that? The SAP ecosystem of stuff that kind of hovers around S/4HANA and the other ancillary products, and then you've got non-SAP stuff. How did you guys find the right balance of the SAP products versus the other stuff that you use to augment the rollout?
Well, we had a lot of conversations, a lot of work with our enterprise and solution architects. The hard thing about these data platforms and environments, certainly on the analytics side, is they're very cyclical. There's a new flavor of the month, whether, a few years ago you could have looked at Tableau, the end user capabilities and the analytics. Now we've got a really strong voice from our data science organization. they like to use different tools and what they want to work and how. But ultimately, we wanted to align ourselves with, what we thought were the best platforms moving forward so we could create. I think our long-term answer is to create certified data sets and a handful of certified standard reports. But ultimately, I want to create the platform that others can come in. We have a user base of largely engineers spread out all through North America. They're not intimidated by technology. In fact, they want to get in and write their own queries and get their own result sets. And so, a partner like Snowflake in that example is a great platform for us to be able to provide capabilities from the centralized IT function, but then also allow those end users. The other thing that we really like about Snowflake is it has already and will continue our ability to share data with some of our key partners is extremely high on that Snowflake platform. Rather than having months worth of ETL creation and passing files back and forth and getting things to sync up, you can simply, if you're both Snowflake customers, agree to data shares, and you're off and rolling in literally hours as opposed to months. So yes, we're thoughtful about what we're using and why. We will keep our finger on the pulse of what will be the latest and greatest things in it. I'm sure you guys, pay attention to this. SAP is going to continue to try to find ways to get more presence and more vendor lock-in. They're going to want more in DataSphere and other things in that data realm. And we're not intentionally trying to pull more things out, but we're trying to provide the platforms that have the best technical capabilities at a point in time to deliver business value. If 5 years from now, SAP's absolutely killing it in the data and analytics space and bringing in non-SAP data sources to that and being able to do it all, and that's what they want to do, we will pivot to what the right thing is for the company at that point in time. We had a different, well-known data warehouse for the better part of 10 years, but at a point in time going forward, the best answer for Kiewit was a different solution set. And so we weren't so much concerned about it. I'm fortunate to work at a company that understands that sunk cost. The question they asked me was not how much money have we spent to get to this point. It's what's the right answer for Kiewit moving forward. And for us, that was a pivot to Snowflake in that case. So a lot of things come into play with it, but you're going to have to be flexible in the ability to share data across these big platforms. It wouldn't surprise you if, again, I told you we've got ServiceNow, we've got SAP, we've got a lot of big different platforms, and we're trying to find ways to avoid having to move data all over the place all the time. But when I talk to our peer companies and companies in different industries, oil and gas in particular, with much larger and more complicated footprints, we're all talking about the same kind of challenges. There is not one perfect and definitive answer for everyone.
Yeah. Well, it gets back to the ownership, having clarity or intent, purpose and intent of why you're doing what you're doing. And, you bring up vendor lock as something that it sounds like it's in the back of your mind. It's not the primary driver of how you choose technologies or platforms you're going to roll out, but it is maybe a secondary benefit of having multiple technologies is you're not locked into one vendor. So that's maybe it wasn't your main driver, but that can be a benefit or advantage as well.
That's right.
So here's some interesting comments coming in here from the threads we've covered so far. That's a question I'm going to get to in just a moment. Actually, while I'm pulling up these comments here, I want to share with the audience another resource that might help here. We have a guide to S4HANA. You can find it right here if you scan this QR code. It gives our tips and lessons from having helped many companies through their S4HANA journeys. So if you want to learn more and read that book for free, you can download it by scanning this QR code here, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat below as well. But getting to some of the comments here, Dan says he's the one that asked about the data. That was the data question. Dan says, thank you for your candor and great advice for a plan to clean after the brownfield is done. And then Ginger followed up on the comment you had around SIs and how you chose your SI. And Ginger said, my experience is that smaller SIs and independents are not bound to the methodology. They're more bound to the outcomes needed. If pivot adjustment is needed, they do that quickly. Now, I would add to that it's important to have a methodology, though. You don't want to be so flexible that you don't have a tool set or a repeatable process that you can at least start with or draw from. But I think finding that right balance of repeatable methodologies with flexibility to adapt to whatever the client needs, I think that's the big thing there.
That's right.
Here's a real quick question, or a really important, interesting question from Sam on LinkedIn. Sam says, how much planning took place before you pulled the trigger? What did that planning process look like for you guys? I know it started back in 18, but sort of as you got ramped up, what was the planning process?
Yeah, we talked about, briefly 2018 initial evaluation. 2022 was initial stages of a very lightweight RFI, RFP process. We're not heavy in terms of process and just the amount of documentation. You can get analysis paralysis. There's companies that evaluate and look at something like this for over 5 years, and everything just continues to move for that kind of time period. I would tell you in 2022 we got really serious about it. In 23 we started to really get our ducks in a row, talk to the executive team downtown, talk to them why we thought this was the right time, and again, in alignment with what we were doing on this $1 billion acquisition. So if I were to say it had been a singular focus, it would have been 6 to 9 months worth of planning. But the other thing we did, we signed the deal at the end of Q1 2024 with SAP, but we had all our ducks in a row ready to hit the ground running at that point in time. We also were very intentional about an extended runway to put this in. SAP and these other companies are going to want to do two things. One, sign you to the specific deal, and they're going to want to get you live on it so they can check the check mark in terms of, in our case, you're live on Rise. We were very intentional about what we wanted to do, how we wanted to do it, and why. And it led to an elongated time frame. I mentioned the data challenges. We probably could have done the pure SAP part of this in 9 to 12 months comfortably. But when you start to add in everything else we were going to have to do to not disrupt the downstream data, we ended up extending our total time frame to ultimately what will be about, let's just call it 2 years in terms of rough numbers. We could have gone faster, but we think this is the right pace. We think it allows for a resource ramp at a manageable level for us. You've got a lot of factors in play. You've got supply and demand from SAP, talent pool perspective, functional and technical resources. You got this end of life deadline that I'm guessing a number of you watching today are looking at and wondering, hey, how's that going to play out? You got a lot of people sitting on the sideline wondering, is SAP going to back off in terms of this end of maintenance deadline? Well, if you're paying attention to what's happening on Wall Street and in their filings, they're not changing their perspective. Short of a new CEO and a new board of directors, this is working for them financially. And what's best for SAP and the SAP shareholders in all cases may not be directly aligned with what's best for you as the customer. But for a variety of things, to answer your question, we really started in earnest in 22 and 23. I would tell you need at least 9 to 12 months. But when you start to talk about multiple years of doing nothing but planning, you probably need to take a step back and go, wait a minute, something's off. It shouldn't take that much effort.
Yeah, you may have bigger issues if you can't get out of the planning phase. And you're right about analysis paralysis. I mean, you get a point of diminishing returns. You want to do planning, you want to have a clear blueprint, you want to have governance, you want to have a data strategy, change strategy, all that stuff laid out up front. But you can spend years on that planning process, and those are years you could be spending actually moving forward with the transformation. So it's a balancing act for sure.
The caveat I would have in that is if you were doing a greenfield, if you were really doing true business transformation, then again, you've got a different set of variables. The amount of time you need for workshopping in that is much different than what we were doing is, hey, we're going to show you the things that are different. Is this going to work or not? So it's a fairly restricted subset of change as opposed to we're going to blow everything up. So just keep that in mind. Your time frame could change if you're doing a greenfield.
Yeah. Related to that, the planning process and ownership of the project, Jason on LinkedIn asked the question that's a good one. Does Kiewit have a formal enterprise program management office, and where does this conversation fit into that structure and that overall planning that you talked about?
And are we talking in reference to like a PMO versus an enterprise PMO?
Well, you're saying PMO or ePMO. How do you guys maybe talk about how you structure the two if you've got both?
We only have a project management office, and it resides within the technology group. I am familiar with, in some other examples in my career of where the PMO might originate in a technology group, and all of a sudden the business areas really like the way the predictable outcomes that provides, or it becomes an enterprise PMO. We do a project management office for our technology solutions contained within the PMO. But if you do know anything about Kiewit and the engineering, but more so the construction side. We build multi-billion-dollar things, whether it's infrastructure and highways, bridges, oil platforms. The way those projects are managed is different on different tool sets than what we do in the core IT.
Got it.
area.
What about in one other thing I want to make sure we don't forget, or that I don't forget, because I did forget until you mentioned it. You talked in passing about RISE. Can you talk a little bit more about SAP's RISE and what role that's played in your implementation, and what's the value been for you guys so far?
Well, on the value side, I would tell you it's too early to know for sure. For a new SAP customer, if you were just coming to them, out of the blue and you've been on something else without significant hyperscaler experience, RISE makes a tremendous amount of sense. The bet for us with RISE is around long term. Will they keep their commitments and create future innovations on RISE only as they've promised or threatened, depending on your perspective? They are clearly pushing RISE for a variety of reasons, and again, not the least of which is the shareholder value. We took a hard look at RISE and non-RISE. Our ECC environment was on-prem. We've got a tremendous amount of hyperscaler experience. But again, it's about what we believe they are going to deliver over the long term. That was a lot of why I went to RISE. Do we see that value yet? No. They also will talk about, and it makes sense from a PaaS perspective, taking non-value-added infrastructure activities off your plate as a customer. That's real, but it's not compelling for Kiewit. In our case, we've got a very robust infrastructure team with extensive Azure chops. We ended up choosing Azure as our RISE hyperscaler. You'll get to pick your own as you move forward, but that wasn't a major selling point for us. I tell you, we're not paying for Azure or PaaS experience. Getting off the ground in full transparency has actually been a little harder on RISE had we been doing it ourselves. With RISE, you've got SAP's infrastructure provisioning timelines, you've got marked up SKUs, you've got limited SKUs in what we have as a private cloud agreement with them. And so for customer off the street, you don't have a big IT staff that has experience with a hyperscaler, RISE makes a hell of a lot of sense. In our case, it was a harder conversation because we have tremendous infrastructure talent. We've got a tremendous amount of Azure experience. We would know the SKUs we want, but they're not on the menu for RISE. They're not certified SKUs. So working through that collaboratively with SAP has been, honestly, a challenge. I think they would say it's been a challenge. We've got a rhythm where we're going to end up with a great environment, but ultimately, you got to understand what you're getting and what you're giving in that RISE agreement. But the value proposition for us will be determined in the long term. Talk to me 3 or 4 years after go live. I can tell you, was it the right pick or not? But for right now, and even at the point in time, we felt like it was the right choice. And to SAP's credit, and we had to push for this, they gave us pricing for RISE and non-RISE. They gave us quotes for on-prem. Initially, they were clearly trying to incentivize you to move to RISE, but at the end of the day, they gave us good faith quotes on both sides, and we made the decision in full transparency to go RISE, even when we had a case could be made defendably to go our own hyperscaler or even run this thing on-prem. We had all the choices, and we still chose RISE.
Yeah, interesting. Well, last question for you. I would ask your advice to CIOs or project teams that are about to begin. And if you want our advice, download this guide to S4HANA. Scan this QR code, you get it for free. You can read it. It goes through all of our tips for how to get started, how to manage your transformation with SAP, and just how to prepare for it. But what if I'm a new CIO and I'm thinking about moving forward with S4HANA or any ERP project for that matter? What advice? What's the biggest piece of advice you could give? So maybe that one thing you wish someone would have told you, or maybe you didn't know. What would you say?
If I had to circle back to one, it's going to sound overly simplistic, but it's the right people. Who do you have working with you? Who do you have helping you? Who do you have calling you out when you're making questionable or wrong decisions? Who's going to challenge you, but help get you on the right track? It's one of the things that we felt very good about the engagement with Third Stage. We've got people embedded that are always looking for, and I'm always questioning, what are we missing? What do we not have right? But ultimately, talent will always win, whether it's in your contract negotiation or your SI partners. If you don't have an A team it's going to make it extremely difficult to be successful in something like this. And so I think, as simple as that sounds, it does come back all the way to the people.
It's easy to forget, in this world of RISE and cloud and AI, all the cool technology stuff. A lot of times it's something that simple gets lost in the shuffle. So I think it's
that's right. It's the A team. That's right.
Thank you, Justin. Great conversation. And thank you to the audience for the great questions. Lots of good stuff there, and hope to have him back to get sort of a touch point or a check-in to see how the project's coming along here a few months out. So stay tuned, and hopefully we'll be able to get him back on the show later this year to see how things unfold and evolve and continue to unfold and evolve with his project. So we've got a lot more to cover. We're going to debrief on this conversation here in just a moment, and then we're also going to talk about some whistleblower claims in the S4HANA community. We've got a lot more to cover. Stick around. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control. I want to invite you to join me and other thought leaders in the digital transformation space to Stratosphere 2025. It's an annual conference we've hosted now for 7 years in a row. It's a great event. It's live in Denver, Colorado, but we're also offering it virtually via hybrid tickets. And we're going to have a lot of different speakers here, including myself as a keynote, as well as others that you may know from the industry. And this is a perfect conference if you're interested in any sort of digital transformation, including ERP and CRM and HCM. And actually, the theme for this year's session is AI and how AI is affecting all different types of digital transformation. But in addition to AI, we'll also talk about the fundamentals of digital transformation, including program management, evaluating the right software, digital strategy, change management, process improvement, all the things you need to know to make your project successful. It's also a great way to network and learn from others. So just being part of a community that is also like-minded and going through the same things you are, that's another value. And you can join, like I said, remotely in person, and you can also buy VIP tickets if you'd like more exclusive access to me and others from the Third Stage team and other speakers that are going to be there. So I hope to see you soon. Check out my discount code below for discounted tickets. You can go to stratosphere2025.com for more information, including the full agenda, and I hope to see you there.
Are you looking for ways to promote your product or service to enterprise technology decision makers and influencers throughout the world, like the ones who listen to this podcast? Major Tom Productions creates media, events, and influencer marketing for B2B technology providers. Our productions are exciting, educational, disruptive, and effective. Most importantly, they create results. Our content is unlike any other in this industry, engaging, influential, and trusted by technology buyers and influencers throughout the world. Each month, our productions reach hundreds of thousands of targeted buyers and decision makers who trust and engage with our honest and tech-agnostic content. With long-tail viral results and engagement with our content, Major Tom Productions provides a way to reach your target market and create awareness, calls to action, and a connection with potential customers. So collaborate with us today. Learn how we can feature your product or service on podcasts such as Transformation Ground Control, Journey to S4HANA, and Journey to Dynamics 365. We can also feature your brand on our YouTube channel called Digital Transformation with Eric Kimberling, which boasts over 100,000 subscribers and over 2 million video views per year. You can also participate in our in-person events, including our Digital Stratosphere Conference. Contact us today to learn more. We can tailor a marketing campaign that works for you. We look forward to helping more people learn more about and become engaged with your brand.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 234. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Darian Chwialkowski. You can find new episodes of the show every Wednesday at transformationgroundcontrol.com. And today, in this particular episode, we've been talking quite a bit about SAP S4HANA implementations. We just had Justin on the show from Kiewit talking about his S4HANA implementation experience so far. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from that conversation, Darian?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. I always love hearing perspective from the customer, right? I feel like they have a different relationship than what we can just speak to realistically on our side of things. So it's always nice to hear their perspective on things as well. There's definitely a couple follow-up questions I had from the conversation for you, Eric. Obviously, them being a customer for you for a long time, what internal talent can you develop during an ERP project, and how do you invest in them to make sure it goes well, like theirs did?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's a lot you can do. I mean, first of all, as it relates to the product you're implementing, whether it's S4HANA, any other ERP system, training your internal team on the core generic basic functionality of the software before you even start the implementation is really important, because the more you can train them on how the technology works, the less you're going to be blindly and helplessly dependent on your software vendor and or system integrator to provide that guidance. In other words, if you don't have any expertise in-house about how S4HANA works or any other ERP system you might be deploying, you're going to be probably over dependent on outside third parties to do the work for you, and you're not going to have as much ownership and responsibility and control over the project as you would need or want. And that's something that Justin talked about, is about how they sort of maintain control and ownership of the project, and they made decisions that made sense for them, not necessarily what the vendors wanted or where the hype resides. So that's one thing, is to train your team internally on the technology you're deploying. Oftentimes that means not only upskilling your current team, but even bringing in outside resources. So bringing in contractors, contract to hire resources, full-time resources, permanent placements, some combination of all the above, but upskilling your existing team, augmenting your existing team with other resources that you manage internally is very important. And that's a big part of why we started our staffing arm, our sister company called Lander Talent, it's a staff augmentation, a staffing company for IT departments. So it's meant to provide resources that clients themselves can manage, and ultimately these resources can be with clients long-term, permanently, whatever the case may be. So that's another strategy, is that are not mutually exclusive. You've got your upskilling your existing team, adding to your existing team by bringing in new resources. And it's not just technical knowledge either. It's also a matter of training your team on program management, change management, ERP implementations in general. What are the keys to success, and what are the things that other companies screw up that you want to make sure you don't? So that's a big part of what we do with our clients too, is train them, to train their teams and educate them on what they need to do to be successful, and how successful projects look different than failed projects, et cetera, et cetera. So a combination of all that stuff is what's important. I think the investments you make in your internal team are just as important, probably even more important than the outside system integrator or technical implementers that you end up choosing.
Yeah, absolutely. And another question to go on top of this conversation, Justin said we probably overdid it on the OCM side, but nobody was really surprised on board. What is your take on that? Is there really even a risk in ERP for over communication?
No, I don't think there is. I mean, it's almost a misleading term to say you're over communicating or over focusing on change management. I don't think it's possible. And like I said to Justin in the conversation, I've yet to meet that person that says they wish they wouldn't have done as much. Usually, even the ones that felt like they over communicated or spent a lot on change management, even the ones where we provided our best change solution and resources, and they had their best internal resources focused on change management, it's never quite enough. You always wish you had a little bit more time, effort, and focus on change management, just because there's so many moving parts in these projects, and it's just hard. It's hard to do well. And even when you do it well, there's still more you could have done. But the key is to err on the side, like he said, he used the word, I try to err on the side of over communicating. And just know you probably aren't ever going to over communicate. You may feel like it at times because you live and breathe this stuff every day because you're part of the project. Or if you're an executive sponsor or a C-level person, you're hearing about it all the time because you're involved, but the average person in the organization is not. So it may be ingrained in your head, but most people only know a tiny little fraction of what you have in your head. So you've got to just think of it from their perspective and communicate as much as you can.
Yeah, that's a great point. And one last question to kind of wrap all of this up and to turn Justin and the team's journey into one kind of tagline here. If you were to turn it into a case study, what is the one headline lesson you'd want all companies going into an SAP implementation to take away?
I'd say it's probably, if it's a headline for how it summarized that discussion and what they're doing that I think is really important for others to know and learn from, is that, client takes ownership of project and does what's right for them. What makes the most sense for them. So that's really how I would summarize everything he said. I mean, I'm not saying they're perfect or their strategy is the right strategy for everyone. The point is that they have a clear strategy. They know what it is they want and what they don't want, and they're taking complete ownership of that, for better or for worse. And I think that is the most important thing. That to me is more important than the actual decision or the actual strategy itself. And I hate to say that because as much as I love strategy, I love a good strategy. The key is they're all in sync on that, and they all agree, or they seem to agree, that is the right approach for them as an organization. And so far, it seems to be the case.
Yeah, absolutely. But what a great conversation. Like I said, love to hear the case study or the perspective from the client. And it was a great conversation overall.
Yeah, it was great stuff. It was good to have him on. He was a great guest, and I look forward to having him back. And again, if you want to download the guide to successful S4HANA implementations, be sure to check that out. We've got a link to that in the description field below, or the show notes below. So be sure to check that out too. If you want to augment your lessons from Justin, you can also read that guide to give you more advice on how to make your S4HANA project successful. So one last thing we want to cover here today, which is a really important one, and that is some of the whistleblower claims in the industry. And when I say whistleblower, I'm not saying anyone's going to get sued or we're going to government officials, or to the media with this type of stuff. But it's more about some of the dirty secrets we're learning from clients about the S4HANA community, about the way some of the vendors are acting and the way organizations are getting pressured in their S4HANA journeys or in their technology journeys in general. So I want to roll this video clip from you. It's actually a video from my YouTube channel where I talk about this. And then I'd love to hear the audience feedback on this stuff too. Is any of this stuff you can relate to or that resonates with you that you've observed in the industry? Because these are things that I find super interesting and somewhat shocking in talking to so many different clients throughout the world that are going through or thinking about going through S4HANA implementations. And I'm not here to completely bash SAP, or certainly not here to bash anyone that's going through an S4HANA implementation, but I do want to shine a light on this stuff because I think it's really important for organizations to go in with eyes wide open, to know what the risks are, know what the blind spots are, and to mitigate them. They're not going to go away, but you can mitigate them. So I think knowing that they're there is really important, and that's really the whole thing we want to focus on here. So let's roll the clip, and then we'll come back and talk about it. The ethical issue with S4HANA implementations that you might be most aware of, because it is fairly well known and documented in the industry, is that SAP is essentially forcing many of its very large multinational client base onto S4HANA, whether they're ready or not, whether or not they want to, simply because they're discontinuing support for ECC and other legacy products. So a lot of these large multinational organizations have just a few years to get off their legacy system onto S4HANA. Now, this may be nothing new to you. You may be in the same situation. You may be facing the same type of pressure, but many of the clients that have come forward to us, several of them have expressed significant concern about the ethics of this. Is this right? Should this be allowed within the enterprise technology space? Should a company like SAP be allowed to essentially hold for ransom all the applications and data that a company might be running on their legacy SAP system? Now, I'd love to hear from you what you think on this question. Is it right for SAP to be doing this? Is it a free market, therefore they have the right to do it? Love to hear your feedbacks in the comments. But many of our clients express significant concern, and that's why they come to us to figure out what are their options. How can they either get off that legacy system without moving to S4HANA? How can they extend the life cycle of their legacy SAP system? How can they find third-party maintenance and support options? Or how can they find an off-ramp to go to a different direction to find a different system other than SAP? And being tech agnostic, we're at the forefront of helping a lot of clients do that. But one thing I'll say, the good news in all this is that there are ways around this problem in the industry. First of all, you don't have to migrate ever. You don't ever have to get off your old
ECC system or your old legacy system. It may mean that you don't have support for a certain period, but it doesn't mean you necessarily have to upgrade. There's also third-party support providers like Rimini Street, Spinnaker, and others that provide third-party SAP support that can extend your investment in legacy SAP until 2040 and maybe even later. So there's other options out there. You can also look at other ERP systems. You can also move off your legacy system and move in a different direction away from SAP, but you don't have to migrate in the time frame that SAP says. But regardless of what you do or don't do, this is one of the things that whistleblowers have come forward with in our client community, and that's something that's a real problem in my opinion. One of the themes we've heard from a couple of different clients, but one in particular was very outspoken about this concern, is that a large multinational client that we're working with, based in the United States, it's a multinational company, is on ECC. They had been implementing SAP for several years, and they just finished their ECC implementation about 2 to 3 years ago. And during that cycle of finishing up the last of the locations for that multi-year ECC rollout, SAP already started applying pressure to them to start upgrading to S/4HANA. And the way this particular CIO expressed the concern to me was that they hadn't even gotten the ROI from their initial investment on ECC to justify the investment they already made. But yet SAP was coming to them with a big price tag for what it was going to cost to upgrade to S/4HANA without even getting any sort of value out of ECC, especially in some of the latter deployments and rollouts of the product. So the fact that a customer like this, and this is a very big company, it's a well-known company, the fact that a customer this big and this well-known and this profitable now can spend tens of millions of dollars on an ECC implementation and there's no accountability for ROI, and SAP turns around and says, now you need to implement S/4HANA, they don't care whether or not this customer gets an ROI on ECC. All they care about is making sure that S/4HANA gets deployed at this organization and that they make more money on that deployment. So this is, in my opinion, wrong, but I'd love to hear from you. What do you think? Is this, whose problem is this? Whose fault is this? Is there a problem here? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Vendor lock is another concern that we've had clients come forward and complain to us about. And vendor lock is a challenge for any ERP implementation because any ERP vendor is going to try and expand their footprint and get as much of their technology rolled out throughout your organization as possible. But SAP is particularly aggressive about this, not only in deploying S/4HANA, but the entire suite of SAP products. So when you implement S/4HANA, you're usually not just implementing S/4HANA, you're also implementing Ariba, you're implementing SuccessFactors. During implementation, you're also using tools like WalkMe and Signavio that are owned by SAP. And SAP has a really good knack for locking you into not only the tools you're going to use long-term, but even for the tools you use during implementation. And again, a lot of our clients come forward and have said, that's just wrong. We want something other than Ariba, for example, on the procurement side, or we want something other than Signavio for our business process mining and our business process management. But yet SAP creates a closed-off ecosystem that makes it at least feel as though you have to use SAP tools and SAP tools only. SAP is one of the more insular vendors in the space in that they don't really like playing nicely with other technologies and other things that aren't part of the SAP ecosystem. But just know going into your SAP project that you don't have to use Ariba and all these other systems that SAP has acquired. You can mix and match whatever you want. If it makes sense for you, you can choose not to use SAP tools. But the point being that many customers feel like they're being stiff-armed into using these SAP tools without being able to consider other options. The problems with S/4HANA implementations aren't just limited to SAP. The SAP system integrators have also had issues, and we've had people come forward with complaints about them. The biggest one, the most memorable one I have in the last couple of years, is one of the big four consulting firms just signed a contract with one of our large multinational clients. And in that contract, the big four consulting firm insisted that they had ultimate decision-making authority over the implementation, over every decision that was made in the project. And to me, this is absolutely ridiculous. First of all, I don't know why any system integrator or big four consulting firm would think this is appropriate. But second of all, even more surprisingly, I don't know why our client agreed to it. And they had already agreed to this clause before they hired us. And then surprise, surprise, later on they ran into a problem during the implementation from the same big four provider because guess what? They had ceded all control to the Big Four consultant. And it's not just hypothetical control, it's contractual control. Contractually, they were bound to let the Big Four consulting firm make all the decisions related to the project. Now, some of you may be thinking, well, of course you would do that because the Big Four consulting firm is the group of S4HANA experts, so of course they would need to make the decisions. However, this isn't an S4HANA implementation. This is a business transformation. It affects your operations, your people, your culture, your long-term strategy. And for that reason, it should not be your Big Four consulting firm or any third party for that matter that has ultimate decision-making authority. If anything, I would say it has to be you, and it should be you as an organization. Your leadership team should be the ones responsible for making the final decisions. And any Big Four consulting firm, or any consulting firm for that matter, that doesn't agree to that is probably someone you should shy away from. So demanding complete control is not just something we've seen with this one client. We've actually seen it across many clients, across multiple big consulting firms that demand that same level of control over the client's business. Another way that big consulting firms are also guilty of causing client problems with S4HANA implementations is related to their whole consulting model. These big consulting firms' model is a lot like a pyramid. You've got senior people that are making high rates and big bucks, but the real money that's made by these consulting firms is at the bottom of the pyramid. The low-level people that are getting paid very low salaries, but they're getting billed out at a high rate, and those are actually the highest margin people and resources within a lot of these big consulting firms. So naturally, the big consulting firms want to staff as many of these people on projects as possible, which is why big consulting firms are so notorious for hiring a bunch of kids just out of college to go handle these sorts of implementations. And disclaimer, I was one of those kids at one point when I first started in consulting, so I understand the value as a new consultant. However, that doesn't mean it's right for your business. Especially in today's day and age with AI tools, unfortunately, a lot of those kids coming out of college, their jobs can be automated with AI. A lot of the grunt work, the documentation, the analysis, the development, the coding, the integration, all the stuff that required mass armies of people can now be automated, should be automated with AI. However, the big consultancies are still pricing their services largely the same as though AI didn't even exist. One way that we're handling this at Third Stage is we have a tech-agnostic mission control AI tool set that we use not only for SAP implementations, but for any sort of digital transformation. And this AI tool uses AI agents to capture every meeting, every discussion around the project, to collect all that tribal knowledge throughout the course of a multi-year project into an AI tool set that will then automate the creation of deliverables. So things like a prioritized requirements document, a design document, a change impact assessment on the change management side of things, a strategic articulation map, all the things that you might create at the beginning of a project all the way through testing, training, deployment, go live, and measurement of benefits realization. All that stuff can be automated largely by AI and AI agents. So AI should be slashing the cost of S4HANA implementations, but we have yet to see any material movement in the cost of the average S4HANA implementation. Now, if you'd like to learn more about Mission Control AI and how you might use that tool on your project to save you a lot of money, feel free to reach out to me. I've included a link below and a QR code right here that talks a bit about Mission Control AI, and I'll give you some more ideas on how you might be using AI to automate and to speed up and to save money on your project. So these are just a few things we've heard in recent months and years regarding whistleblowers from our client community that have come forward, but I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on what's going on in the S4HANA implementation space? Am I overreacting? Do you think this is no big deal? Do you think it's a bigger deal than I'm making out to be? Love to hear your feedback below.
So that was a clip from my YouTube channel where I talk about 5 different things that are sort of the dark, dirty little secrets we're seeing in the industry in the S4HANA space. What were some of your thoughts and takeaways from the video, Darian?
Yeah, it was super interesting to not only this whole podcast episode has been really interesting to dive into the different areas of SAP, whether it's company perspective or your perspective in that video and what different whistleblowers have come out and said about it. But a couple of questions to follow up on this for companies to look out for. What are some red flags that leaders should watch for initial SAP proposals?
I think the biggest thing is just over optimism, perfect world assumptions, over optimism and hype. Those are probably the biggest things because those are the things that lead to faulty assumptions or faulty expectations. And when you have faulty or flawed assumptions, unrealistic expectations, that's what leads to bad decisions later on that typically lead to failure. So if I can do one thing for a client and help them go into a project with their eyes completely wide open, they know what the risks are. And again, I'm not even here. I've no people oftentimes will ask me like why I hate SAP so much or why I hate S4HANA so much. I do not hate S4HANA. I do not hate SAP. In fact, I grew up in the SAP space. That's how I started my career. So I know SAP really well, and we've helped a lot of companies through their S4HANA implementation. So if anything, it's just exposed us to what the risks and what the dark sides are. And because we're tech agnostic and we're not affiliated with SAP, we don't make any money from SAP. We don't worry about offending SAP. All we're really here to do is to expose the truth for clients that are going through these projects so that they don't necessarily change their mind about S4HANA, but they at least know what the blind spots are and what the risks are they need to mitigate. So that's really the gist of it all. And after all that, now I can't remember what your question was. So what was your question?
No problem. I can ask it again. But what are like the red flags that they should look for just in contracts in general when a proposal, when an initial proposal comes through, what's written on that proposal that would be a red flag?
Yeah, great. Thank you for restating what was already a great question. I just totally lost track of it. So I think the things, I talked about make sure you have realistic expectation. So I think when you're reviewing a proposal from a SAP partner or SAP themselves, the software side is fairly straightforward and more predictable and more black and white. But even on the software side, you need to make sure you understand what you're agreeing to. What the potential subscription increases might look like in the future. Is there a cap on those? Are you able to get your data out if you ever decide you want to move away or move off of S4HANA onto another non-SAP platform? Those sorts of things. But I think the bigger material risk that needs to be considered contractually is on the implementation side, because that's usually where companies completely get it wrong. The SIs, the big tier 1 SIs, even sometimes the mid-tier SAP implementers will come in with these overly optimistic rose-colored glass sorts of assumptions that just aren't ever going to happen, and they aren't ever going to materialize that way. And so you want to go in with skepticism when you review these proposals, not because you want to offer to pay the vendor more, but because you might say, well, if they're telling you it's going to be $10 million over 2 years, it might be that, okay, maybe 10 million is the right number, but 2 years may not be the right amount. So let's stretch that over 3 years and go at a lower run rate at a lower burn rate on the finances for the implementation, so that you know that up front. Because if you wait until later and catch it and realize, oh, this was never going to be a 2-year project, it's actually a 3-year project, now you've already blown through your $10 million in those 2 years, and now you're just going to add to that, and you'll probably end up at like 15 or 17 million or whatever the math comes out to for a 50% overrun. So that's the key there, is to just go in with those realistic expectations so you can set the run rate accordingly. And also, make sure you have control over the resources, because too often these SIs, it's sort of like the wizard in the Wizard of Oz. Don't look behind the curtain on how Oz actually operates. They don't want you to see behind the curtain, but you have to look behind the curtain to know what the hell's going on with your project. It's your money. But SIs oftentimes have this a weird arm's length sort of approach to how their resources are managed. And I think a lot of that is because, Justin was talking about, landing the first 100 people on a project, a lot of junior people that are burning through time and money. If you don't have visibility over that, and you don't ask the question of why do I have all these kids on this project building so much money, and do I really need that, especially in today's day and age where so much of what these kids are doing and the work that's getting offshored, you can use AI and other tools to automate that. And that's a big part of what we're seeing with our, we've got our mission control AI tool set that we use for S4HANA implementations, as well as other non-SAP ERP implementations as well. And it's a way to speed up a lot of this stuff that companies have historically paid tons and tons of money to technical implementers to do. But now our AI tool set will do it faster and better, because it's also capturing all the tribal knowledge that's been captured throughout an entire project. So that's what I would say, is just to look at the overall cost and assumptions and make sure that it fits your reality, and that you take it with a grain of salt and you add a dose of reality to it before you commit and, get budgetary approval based on that proposal.
Those are some great points. And final question here for you, Eric. When you hear from a client who feels trapped by SAP or any ERP vendor, where do you start with them, and what's kind of the first lever that they should pull in order to not feel that trap anymore?
Well, I think a lot of it is, in the tech stack itself. In the conversation we had earlier with Justin, with our client from Kiewit, he talked about how they, in addition to S4HANA, they're using Palantir and Snowflake and other tools that are not SAP related. And I think that's one way to hedge, is to shift the balance of power or diversify the balance of power, so it's not all on one provider that could someday screw you, either intentionally or unintentionally. So I think that's probably the biggest thing you could do. And then also just, again, going at your own pace, following your own strategy, marching to the beat of your own drum. That all, it's not something that they teach in SAP University or in PMP certification courses or in change management courses. They don't really teach you that, but that's something that's so important, is that you take ownership and you have that internal alignment with what it is you're doing, day-to-day decision making with what it is you're trying to accomplish overall as an organization.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. But what a great episode today with a lot of SAP focus. I feel like we touched on a lot of different things with SAP, but it was great to dive into it overall.
Yeah, great conversation, great guest here today, and certainly great questions from the audience. So thanks to everyone for being part of it. And thank you, Darian, for your help as always. And thanks for listening in to the audience. New episodes every week, every Wednesday. You can find it at Transformation Ground Control. You can also listen to all the past episodes, browse through the entire library or catalog of past episodes of the show dating back to early 2021. You can go to transformationgroundcontrol.com for that. And actually, a couple other resources if you are interested in learning more about S4HANA implementations. I mentioned earlier in the episode our guide to S4HANA implementations. You can read that for free by scanning the QR code right here on the screen, or go to the links below. We'll include links to the guide. And then also we have a sister podcast, kind of a mini series that we put out last year. It's called Journey to S4HANA. And it's, I believe it's 12 episodes where all we did was talk S4HANA implementations. We talked to people that work for SAP, that work for SAP partners, and most importantly, we talked to clients of ours that have been going through S4HANA implementations. So if you'd like to learn more or listen to more podcasts that's objective and not affiliated with SAP, it's sort of the real reality of boots on the ground in S4HANA implementations, just go to journey2s4hana.com, all one word, no special characters, journey2s4hana.com, and you can see that podcast or listen to it wherever you want. So be sure to check that out as well. In the meantime, we'll be back next week with another digital transformation ground control episode. So be sure to tune in then. And in the meantime, hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the next episode of Transformation Ground Control. Take care.
Ground control to Major Tom.